All right. Let's see, chat. Professor, just want to confirm our quiz 3 is due tomorrow. Yes, there's a question on the chat saying if the quiz is due tomorrow. So yes, the quiz is due tomorrow. Right, it was available this morning and it's available till tomorrow at midnight. Okay. Also, let me share my screen. Can you see my screen over here? Let's bring up Canvas. And we let's see the syllabus. All right, so according to the syllabus, let's see, we are in the 7th week. Week number 7, and the React quiz has gone out this morning, and it will be available till tomorrow at midnight. We're going to try and wrap up our discussion of using Redux for state management and how to connect it to a RESTful service. We already talked about that in the last lecture. We're going to expand on that idea. There were a couple other things that loose ends that we need to tie up. And then I'd like to get started on providing connectivity to a server that we built, right? So I've built one, which was the one that you've been using for the last month or so for your assignments, and we want to learn how to do that ourselves, right? We want you to be able to do that on your own and create your own services. Oh yeah, did anybody see the landing today? Well, the landing and then the explosion of the Starship. SpaceX landed its first Starship finally, and then all of a sudden just exploded about 10-15 minutes after it had landed.
Yeah, Professor, I think they said that they were expecting that it would explode, right? Because it was a successful attempt, I think, in there.
Yeah. That's fine. It was a success. It's a improvement.
Yeah.
Past iteration. Let's see, another question here. And also, can I ask this? I noticed that we only got 5 questions for quiz 3. How long will it be? I think it's 30-40 minutes, something like that. I forget. But they're pretty much the same, about 30-40 minutes. All right, let's see where we are then. Let me bring up the IDE. Here's the IDE. And let's start the server. And let's see where we left off. Restart. Let's close that. Okay, so we have we've been building this being able to navigate through the courses, and then go into a course, and then be able to select different modules. And so the technique of being able to do this, that we load different modules for different courses, right? That mechanism, right? That is what we worked on last time we met, right? Notice that if I select different courses, I get a different list of modules. Some of them don't even have modules. Okay, so this course ASD, right, has 4 modules, whereas this other course has these other 3 modules, right? So we worked on that, and the way we did that was by encoding the selected course in the URL, right? And then what we want to be able to do is expand that idea so that if we select a particular module, right, we want to be able to see the lessons for that module. Now the techniques is slightly different, right? Because here, when we navigate from course to the editor, when we navigate from this component to this other component, the editor is being loaded brand new, okay, every time. So if I go back, right, and then I go forward, right, this one is being loaded, right? And so what happens is that the use effect, the use effect run that first time, okay, when the component loads. And that's where we are able to trigger the fact that we need to go fetch these modules for this course. We're able to trigger that event, right? That, hey, we're loading the component brand new, go fetch the data for this component. So, and that happens every time we navigate between the course manager and the course editor, right? Now, being able to click on these here, on the modules, and then load up the lessons is slightly different, right? Because we are not loading the module brand new we're not loading the component brand new every time we click on this, right? So we need to be able to, listen to the changes as you click, right? So that we can trigger the events to load the lessons on the right-hand side, on over here. Now, you'd be tempted to do that by using an on-click. Okay, on click, and we could totally do that, right? On click, we go and we fetch the data, and then we store it somewhere in the state, right? But that's not what we want, right? What we want to be able to do is as we click the modules, notice that the module ID is changing up here. Okay, we want that to drive the fact that we're going to load the lessons, right? We want the change in the state as encoded in the URL to drive the fact that we need to load a lesson, right? Because again, if you strictly go by using an on-click, right, and then change the current state of the application, if you do a reload, right, you're going to lose the fact of how is it that you got to a particular state, right? Because all that information is only going to be stored in your reducer, which will be gone if you reload, or even if you copy that URL and you send it to somebody, they won't see what you see, right? So instead, we want the rendering of the UI to be entirely driven by the state in the that we encode in the URL. Okay, so notice that what we have here is that we're clicking different modules, and that is being encoded here. So this is what's going to drive the loading of the lessons, right? Now, we already did that, right? When we load the modules here, right? So what's the big deal? We've done that already. We know how to do that. The problem, again, the difference here is that we were able to load these modules because we were brand new loading the entire component, and we were being notified that the component was being loaded, right? And that's a great time to load ourselves. But in this case, between these two, as you click the different modules, we're not loading a brand new component, right? So we're not going to be notified, meaning probably already being notified the first time and then never again, right? Because we were already, the lesson tabs is going to be loading the first time, right? We're going to be notified when we first navigate to this editor, right? But then never again, right? Instead, we want to be notified every time we click on this, right? Every time this changes up here, right? So how do we trigger that load of the lessons, right? And we're not going to be notified anymore. So that's what we're going to focus on today. Okay. All right. So let's see. Let's go back. Let's see what modules we have. We have these modules. And all right. So where do we leave off? Let's see. Let's take a look at the code. Okay. So we have the module list, and the module list. The module list, it takes, we're able to create new courses, we're able to delete a course, we're able to find the courses for a course, right? This is where we're doing it, right? Right here, we're loading the course ID, and we're going to fetch the modules for that particular course. So we worked on that already. Did we finish the update module? I forget. Update module, let's see. There's an update module, and the reducer. Did we do that? Module reducer, the update looks like we did. Yes, we did. All right, let's test it. Right, so here's the new module, and so let's create here module 1, 2, 3. Say okay. Okay, looks like we did work on this, right? So this is module 2, 3, 4. Say okay. And module 3, 4, 5. Let's say okay. And I'm going to refresh. Okay, so that's working. That is working. The update did work. Okay, so how do we navigate? How do we do this and load the lessons? Okay. All right, so let's work on that now. Let's work on that. Okay, so let's go to the lesson tabs. So right now the lesson tabs is just grabbing the lessons, right, from a hard-coded reducer, right? So let's move this over here, right? And the lesson reducer, there it is. And right now it has this hard-coded list of lessons. So let's remove that, because really what we want to do is just fetch the lessons for the selected module, right? So let's do that. So if I click on a particular course, those are the modules. If I click on this module, then I'll know what the module it is. I want to fetch the lessons for that module. Okay, and so let's do that. So in the lesson tabs. So remember, what we need to do is here in the lesson, we want to be able to trigger, just like we did in the module list, right? In the module list, the way we trigger the loading of the modules for the course is that we created this use effect. See this use effect? And that's where we trigger the fact that we need to go fetch the modules. We're going to do the same thing, but for the lessons, right? We're going to bring in the use lesson, use effect, and here we want to. What we want to be able to do is something like this, right? We're going to say use effect, right? And we're going to we're going to be notified. Oops. We want to load the lessons for the module, okay? And we have the module. There it is, right? Let's print it out. Let's see what we got. Console log module ID. All right, let's put a big console so that we can find it here. Say, load lessons for module. Okay, so let's inspect and let's look at the console. And there it is. See that? It says load lessons for module, and there's our module. Right, so we could load for the current module that we have, that module. Right, we can totally load it, but there's a problem. What happens if I select a different module? See that? It's receiving. Wait a minute. Is this a link here? Right. We could grab that module that we're editing here, right? That we retrieve, and then load the lessons that we have, right? Pretty much what we did in the going from the courses to the module, right? So let's practice the same thing that we did there, so that we get a feeling for how to do it. So let's repeat that. Okay. So we need to trigger the mapper, right? By the dispatch mapper, right? Something like find lessons for module, right? And we're going to pass the module. I'm going to pass the module. And where is this function? Well, we're not going to do that, right? We're going to be, somebody's going to pass me that function, right? Who's going to pass it to me? The dispatcher is going to pass it to me. The dispatcher right now is not passing me anything. Right? I'm going to say the function, I'm going to pass it to you, and then you're going to call me back. You're going to call me back, and you're passing me what? You're passing me the module for which I need to find all the lessons for that module, right? So here's the module that you're passing me. And we'll do console here, console log module ID. All right, so let's move this. Let's move this down here just to make sure that we are reaching this place. Okay. Let's try it again. Let's refresh. Let's clear this. Let's go back to the course, right, and go to the module. use a module. Notice that it's getting the module as undefined, right? Because we haven't selected a module, right? We haven't selected a module. So let's select a module. And as we select the module, notice that we are indeed triggering that lesson at line 40 and 41, which is this one right here, right? So we're getting the modules. So now we have to go fetch the modules, the lessons for this module, and that's in the database, right? In the server. So we need a service to do that, right? So let's create a service that can go fetch this from the remote server, right? So we'll do that in a lesson file, right? The lesson we don't have we don't have a lesson service, so we'll have to create one of those, right? So we say, oops, will be new JavaScript here, and this will be a lesson service. We're trying to just replicate more or less what we did for the module. We're basically practicing, right? So here we'll do the export const, right, in the function find lessons for module, and we'll pass in the module ID. And the URL is going to be very similar, right? Actually, I'm just going to copy it from core service. It's going to be very similar to this. I'm just going to copy it here. Yeah, I'm going to paste it right there. And this is going to be the modules, my parent, right? Modules URL. So this is modules. So that we can append to it the ID of the module, and then that we want the lessons for that particular module. Okay, so this is going to be that URL. We're going to append the module ID. Right, and then we're going to say that we want the lessons for that module. Okay, and this is going to come back with presumably a response from the server, which we're going to parse JSON. We're going to come back we're going to send back a promise that we can then stream that JSON object. Okay, we're going to export this. Export default this find lesson for module, so that folks can just import that object, right? So and we'll call that object the lesson service, right? So back in my lesson tabs, right, I can import that file, and the file is I'm going to call it lesson service from the file that we just created. Lesson service. So this lesson service here is going to be bound to what I am exporting right here, right? So that we can now call the find lesson from outside. Let's see, there's a question on the chat. I have somewhat of a random question. When should we use class and when should we use functions, or is it just a software engineering decision? You should use classes for creating data models, right? Where you have a self-contained set of attributes and properties and behaviors that you want to create instances of, right? So that totally is a great use for classes. But for functions, pure functions that we're using here, React component. Now that we have that have use effect and use state and use history and all these hooks, there's really not a good compelling reason to use classes. So you could totally implement an entire React application just by using functions, and that's it. But for data modeling, right, where you're going to have properties and methods, setters and getters and mutators and whatnot, that's absolutely you should totally use classes for data modeling. Okay. All right, so we have these lesson model. We have these find lessons from the lesson service, so we can call it here now, right? We can say use the lesson service, find lessons for module. We pass in the module ID, and this is going to come back, right, with the actual lessons, which at first they're going to be empty, obviously, right? We don't have any lessons. So we can say console log lessons. Okay. So let's see what we got. So notice that it's empty, right? So if I click on different modules here, right, if I click on this one, it's empty, 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 empty. No lessons. Oh, actually, I do have a couple lessons here that I created just for test purposes, right? Right. So we got a couple lessons actually, right? And but notice that the lesson tab is not rendering them, right? It's not rendering them because what we need to do is now pass these lessons, right, and pass them to the reducer so that the reducer can copy them into the state. Right, so let's do that. Now that we have the lessons, right, we can now call the dispatcher and say dispatcher and send an action, and the action could be called find lessons. Okay, and we can pass the actual lessons, right, like that. Now remember that that's a shortcut. That's a shortcut. Okay, this is type, right? Type find lessons, right? And this is a shortcut syntax that really means this, right? Lessons colon lessons, right? And the shortcut says that if the value, the variable is being set to a variable that is the same name as the property, you can abbreviate that, right, by just providing the value. Okay. So yeah, so that's being passed to the reducer. Reducer. Let's go to a lessons reducer. I don't think we're doing much in the lessons reducer. Yeah, we're not doing anything in the lessons reducer. We're just returning the initial state. That's all we're doing, right? So let's augment this a little bit, right? What we mean to do. What does then do? So remember that in here, right? This fetch here, this fetch is an asynchronous call, right? It's an asynchronous communication to the server because we don't want to have the single thread of JavaScript running on your browser to be stuck waiting for the server to come back with a response, right? So instead of this function being synchronous means that it would call this function, and until the function is not done, it would just sit there waiting, and we don't want to risk, just being stuck there for for a second, for a minute, how long the server might maybe not even come back ever, right? And so we don't want to tie up the browser, right, waiting for this response to come back. So instead, what fetch does, it's asynchronous. And what does dispatch do in the parentheses? We'll see that in a second. Let me finish this first. So the fetch does what fetch does is that it says, well, I'm not going to sit here and wait for the response to come back from the server. Instead, I'm going to let the browser deal with this, right? Because the browser knows how to have multi-threads, right? It can have multiple threads running at the same time, whereas JavaScript only gets one thread. And so, but the browser can have all sorts of threads, and the browser can download, can connect to a whole bunch of servers at the same time and download images and videos and stream, and it can download all sorts of things. So what the fetch does is that it asynchronously starts a thread that goes and fetches this information, and JavaScript doesn't wait for this, right? It just keeps going. To synchronize the fact that at some point the response is going to come back, and we need to synchronize it with whoever generated this request, right? But whoever generated this request is long gone, right? Doing something else, right? So the way we synchronize the two is using what we call a promise. So fetch returns an object. Fetch returns an object, and that object is called a promise. And a promise allows you to register for a callback, right? So that if you don't want to wait, right, then you say, well, I don't want to wait. I'm going to leave you my card. Call me at this card, right, when you're done, right? And then you leave. Right? So this is exactly what's going on, right? So fetch sends back an object that allows us to register a function. Here's a function that will be invoked sometime in the future when the response comes back, right? And so here's what's happening, right? So then, right, is going to invoke this function, whatever function you put in there, notifying you that the response came back, right? And then you could do with the response whatever you want. What are we doing? We are parsing. We are parsing the stream, a stream, a stream that could be, from the file system, right? If you know streams, typically they it could be a long stream, it could be a very short stream, it could be it could be an infinite stream, right? And so you need to start consuming the bits and bytes from that stream and then rebuild that into whatever it is. So it could be a movie that could stream for hours, right? So this is this .json. What it does is that it starts parsing the stream and consuming the stream from the response, right? And it starts rebuilding the JSON object, right? That's coming from whoever sent it back. So this .json, okay, returns another promise. Meaning, hey, the response came back, but I still have to read the bits and bytes that are coming from the server. I need to rebuild that, and that's going to take me a while, right? So I'm going to send you a promise that you have to wait until I let you know when I'm done parsing that stream. So that's what this returns, right? So this whole thing here is returning what the fetch returns, right? What is the fetch returning? The fetch is returning this response.json. Okay, so when we call the find lesson for module, what we get is what? We get the promise from down here that we are streaming the data. And that's why we have here another then, right? This then is that we're waiting for the body to be streamed and reconstructed into a JSON object. Okay, so and when it's done parsing that JSON object, it finally calls a function here, letting you know, okay, well, here's the JSON object that happens to be an array. Of lessons, okay, parsed from the stream. And what are we doing with that? Okay, we are immediately calling the dispatch, right? Here we're calling the function dispatch, which is being passed to us from the reducer, and we are calling the dispatch, which what does it do? It calls the reducers. It actually calls all the reducers. It calls all the reducers, and it passes it this object here, this JSON object here. Oops. Right? We're passing it that JSON object, which contains two attributes. It contains the type attribute and the lessons attribute here. Okay. Right, so that's the JSON object. See the curl. Right, so basically, it's going to call all the reducers, and we have 3 reducers, right? We have the course. Well, actually, no, we don't have the course reducer. We only have the module reducer. We have the lesson reducer. Eventually, you'll also be building the topic reducer. It calls all of them. They all get called, and they all get past this object, right? And so it first calls, say, the module reducer. And the module reducer checks for the action. There's the action. So this object is what we're passing this object here, right? And so it checks to see, is that type, the action type, is it equal to find modules for course? Well, no, it's equal to find lessons. So it skips over that. Is it create module? No. Is it delete module? No. Is it no? No. Okay, so it just leaves it alone. And then it goes on to the lessons reducer. Right, the lesson reducer is not doing anything. It's not even comparing it. So immediately returns the state. Okay. So here is where we're going to augment, and we're going to be listening for. We're going to be listening for that action. Right. So we're going to create here a switch. Right. That is going to switch on the type of the action. Right. And by default, very important. By default, it should always return the current state, right? The unmodified state. That should be the default. If I don't know what you're telling me, I'm just going to return the old state. Okay, I'm just going to stay put. But if instead, right? If instead it's find lessons. Okay, if it's find lessons, you're going to pass me the lessons as part of the action. So in this action object, we have the type that I just passed you. That type, which we're going to compare against find lessons, right? And I'm also passing you lessons. What do I do with those lessons? Well, I want to put them in the state. That's what I want to do. I want to put them in the state, right? And I'm going to return that state. So this state is going to be the old state. I'm going to copy the old state, but I am going to override the lessons to be the lessons that came from the server, and I'm copying them into the state. Right? So I'm making sure that the state that is being maintained by the database, long-term storage, right? I'm copying a snippet of it, right, in my state in the user interface because I want to render them. Okay. All right, so I do that, and so now notice that there are the two lessons, right? The two lessons that we saw earlier, right? The two modules. There they are. Okay, notice that it's going into an infinite loop. See that infinite loop? All right, notice the network. We're hitting the server like over and over and over. So I'm into an infinite loop. And the reason is that because I'm changing the state, right? I'm changing the state, and the state forces the tap to re-render. And when it re-renders, it does the use effect again, right? And the use effect again fetches it, it changes the state, and it re-renders again, right? So it's now in this infinite loop. So remember, we can stop that infinite loop by adding this square brackets, right? If we add that square bracket, it stops the infinite loop. Okay, but now it's broken. It's broken. Right? Notice that if I refresh, notice that it works the first time around, right? Because there's data up there, right? There's data up there. It loads the modules for the course. It loads the lessons for the module that I had selected earlier. And I believe it even fetches them, right? It fetches the lessons, right? But let's clear this out. Notice that now, if I click here, notice that I am not hitting this anymore. I'm not hitting this anymore, right? So before it was working, right? Whenever I clicked on it, whenever the property changed, this was being invoked every single time. Okay. Now it's only being invoked the first time, only that first time, right? We can try it out. We can say console log load lessons for module, right? And then we just here module ID. Okay, let's go to console. There it is. See that? We are loading the lessons for the module. It's being loaded, but then never again, right? Before it was working. What's going on? Well, the reason is that is because we put the square brackets. Okay, this square bracket says, try to remember what the value of whatever's in the square bracket. Try to remember. If it has changed, then yes, go and run this effect. If it hasn't changed, then don't run it again, right? And the reason it works the first time is that at first the array is empty, so there's nothing for me to remember. Okay, so but now something changed, so I'm gonna run this effect, right? But the second time around, right, nothing has changed, so there's no reason for me to call this again. Okay, so what we're gonna do here is we're gonna tell it, we're gonna say then invoke this use effect over and over again, right? So make it call, right? Not an infinite loop, but just just try to remember this. So we're going to say module ID. If the module ID has changed, then yes, trigger this use effect. Otherwise, don't. So if we do that and we click on this, notice that it calls it. We click again. Notice that now it fetches the lessons for that one, right? It fetches the lessons for that, which are empty. And we can select another one. And indeed, it goes and fetches the lessons for that particular module. Make sense? Right? So we need to filter when it is that we want to run that effect. Okay, let's see. What's a question here? If there are no lessons for the particular module, will the map function still work? With the what map function? Oh, well, yes, because these are coming back with empty arrays, right? In the network, right? All these lessons are coming back with empty arrays, so it's okay, right? If it's not an empty array, then yes, it would be an undefined, right? It has to be an array. Yeah, if I don't find anything in the server, what I return is an empty array, right? So that it should be compatible with mapping or filters or any array-based operation. Okay. All right. So let's now expand on this idea, right? We want to be able to create new lessons over here, right? Let's create new lessons for the module that you've selected. Right? So that if I go here and I create lessons ABC, but then go here and create lessons 1, 2, 3, right? Then there'll be different lessons for different modules, right? So let's do that. So first of all, let's in lesson tabs, right? Let's add at the end of our UL, let's add a plus, right? So these here, right? This expression is generating a dynamic list of lessons. Here we're going to add a static LI that is going to have an icon with a plus sign at the end, right? So it's going to say there's going to be class, and there's going to be FAS, FA plus, like that. Okay. All right, and if we click this, we would like to invoke an event that we're not going to handle. Remember, we're not handling any event. We're only notifying whoever is responsible for handling this event. We're notifying them that we want to create a lesson for a module. Right? And we need to let them know that the lesson that we want to create is for a module. So for module. And we do have the module, don't we? Because we're loading it here, right? So let me clean that up a little bit. Right, we have the module that we're parsing from the path, right? And we can pass it. Now notice that this function doesn't exist yet, so I'm gonna remember this. Somebody's gonna pass it to us. But we need to pass the module. We need to pass the module. So we're careful. Don't just make it a function module ID, right? Because that will put you in an infinite loop. Because that function will be invoked right away, immediately when the module gets called, and will create a state change, which will call it again, right? So instead, you need to wrap it inside of a closure, right? Okay, so who's this function? It's somebody's passing it to me. Who's passing it to me? The dispatch mapper, right? So let's create it here, right? You're going to pass me the module ID, and let's see if this works. We're going to say console log, create module lesson for module, and there's the module that we want to create, the module ID. Okay, let's remove this. It's pretty ugly. Let's go back to the module lists. I think we're displaying this, and it's just littering the UI. Okay, that looks a little better. Yeah, so if we go to console and say plus, notice that we are passing the module ID for which we want to create the lesson, right? And so here, right, in the same thing, right? We need to go out to the server to post a new lesson for this module, and so we'll need to create in the lesson service. We need to send a post, right? So let's send a post, right? The function, we use the same function name. I like to use the same function names because it just keeps me straight in my head, knowing who's calling what. Right? And let's not forget to export this so that other folks can use it. And so here we need to we're going to receive the module for which we are creating this lesson, and we need the actual lesson, right? And now this is a lesson for a module, so this URL is correct. This URL is perfect, right? It's the module, right? And then the ID of that module, and then the lessons. So the lessons for a module. So the URL is perfect. Okay, but it's not a get. This is a default get. So we're going to modify that to be post instead. And also we're going to send you as we're going to stream the body, right, of the lesson that we want you to create, right? So in the body, we're going to do JSON.stringify, and we're going to pass you the lesson. Okay, and then the headers, as always, right? So content type, and this is then application/JSON. And we're going to respond with the presumably the brand new lesson that we just created for the module. Okay, and so here we're going to use that service we just built. We're going to say lesson service create module, lesson for the module. Here's the module ID, and we need a lesson, right? And so let's send a bogus lesson. We're going to say that the title is going to be new lesson, right? And so this is going to come back with the actual lesson, the brand new lesson that comes back from the server, right? Which we're going to pass it to the dispatcher, right? The dispatcher, so that we can add this brand new lesson that we added on the server. We want to add it to our collection of lessons in the to the array that we already have, right? So that the same array of lessons that you have remotely on the server matches the array that I have here on the user interface, right? So we're going to send you this type, and we say that we just created a lesson, create lesson, and here's the lesson that you want to create, right? So what is it that don't you like? Lesson, blah, blah, blah. Then I'll close there. Why does it? Oh, it was nothing. Okay. All right. So that means that this is the action that is being sent, right, to the reducer. So when we go to the reducer, we're going to handle that event, right? Create lesson, and basically I'm going to append to the state. I'm going to copy the state, the old state, and lesson is going to be whatever lessons I had before. I'm going to copy over the old lessons that I already have here in the cache, and I'm going to append at the end of this array this brand new lessons that we just created. Right, so this will be lessons will be a brand new array, which will contain at first the old lessons, and then at the end of that array is going to have the new lesson that we just created on the server that we're passing to you through the action, right? In the action object, we're putting the lesson. So this is the action object right here, right? This is the action object. And then we're providing it right here. Okay. All right, so let's see if this works. So let's load lesson, course, sorry. Oops, what's going on here? Lessons, oops. First. Uh-oh. What's going on? Network. Says course error. Cross strict origin. Why am I getting this course? It was just working 2 seconds ago. I think you need to add cross origin allowed in headers. No, this was working just fine 2 seconds ago. What's going on here? Find lessons, create lessons, blah, 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 blah. Find create for module, create lesson for module, modules, create lesson. And create lesson for module, lesson service, create blah, blah. What's going on? Let me restart the server. Let me see. Courses, interesting. Easy courses. Do I have a picture of courses? Oh, I think my whole server's down. Web dev, let me see what's going on. Let me try to restart my server. Let's try and find my server, generic server. And I can see the logs. It's 5:03, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to restart all dynos. State change from crashed to starting. So I'm just rebooting my server. The process coming, blah, 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 start app, memory store, warning, memory store is not designed for production, blah, 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 blah. Okay. The state starting, okay, so it's supposed to be up and running. Let's see. Refresh. Okay, I got my data back. Let's start this again. Let's try it. Okay, I'm back in business. Yeah, so let's navigate to a particular course. I got the lessons, and if I grab modules, there's the lesson, and this one doesn't have any lessons. Right, so let's create a couple lessons here. Let's see if this works. Let's add 3 lessons. Okay, and if I go to this module, I have 2 lessons. If I go to this other module, I have 3 lessons, right? Or if I go here, I have no lessons, right? So each module now has different number of lessons, right? Which is exactly what we wanted. Okay. All right, excellent. So let's the delete and the update, right? So that is very similar, almost identical to what we did for the modules, right? So I'm not gonna do that because that's almost like verbatim what we did for the modules, right? So you can just almost like copy it over. You just need to change the URLs and that's it. Okay. So what I did want to show you is something different, and in particular, what I'd like to be able to do is, for instance, we would like to maybe highlight, highlight which module is selected. Right now, it's not showing any feedback on telling you what is your context, right? Which one is selected. So how do we do that? Okay. So the way we're gonna do that is that notice that at first when we navigate into the in here, okay. Notice that looks like it's trying to load all the lessons, right? All the lessons. So that we need to fix that, right? And what's happening here is that it's going in there, right? And it's retrieving all the lessons, because notice that for the module, see the module? Since I haven't selected any module, right? The module ID is undefined. And it's interpreting that as just I want all the lessons, right? Or probably lessons that were created by error for a module whose ID is undefined, and so we don't want to load any of that, right? We don't want to load the lessons if the modules hasn't been set or if the string is actually undefined. Okay, so let's fix that. So let's go back here and lesson, right? Here's where we load it. We load it right here. So we're only going to do this if the module ID is defined, right? Then we're going to go fetch modules. If not, we're not going to fetch anything, right? So let's check for that. So if, right, module ID is not equal to the actual keyword undefined, right? And right, the type of the module ID, right, is not undefined. Okay, so this says that what this says is that you can say type of a keyword, a variable, and then it can tell you whether it's a string or a number or an object. Okay, and or the module ID could actually be the string undefined, right? In either case, I do not want to go fetch any lessons, right? So I'm going to put here, if it's not undefined, then go fetch for this, right? So there's a question here on the chat says, what does use param do? So what use param does, right, is that it parses the URL here. So let's refresh. Okay, it parses this URL. Okay, and it allows me to retrieve data. It allows me to grab those values, right? So for instance, I want to grab this, and this I know I mapped it to a variable called module ID, and this allows me to say, hey, you know that path parameter that you mapped there? Well, I want it, right? And I know I called it. Oh, sorry, no, this is the course ID. Sorry, this is the course ID. And if I click on this, notice that there's the module ID. I want that too. So I can grab it from the parameters, from the path I can parse it and retrieve it and load it here. Now, where did I give it the names course ID or module ID? Well, I did that when I declare this route, right? I said that route has a pattern, right? And the pattern is that it starts off with course and editor, /courses/editors, and then followed by a placeholder, which I'm going to call course ID, followed by another placeholder, which I'm going to call module ID. Where did I do that? I believe I did that in the course manager. Let me see. Yeah, here in the course manager, right, when I navigate to course editor, I declared three URL patterns, right? So this is looking at the URL at the top. If it sees any of those URL patterns, right, it will render the course editor, right? And so indeed, right, if it just sees the course ID, right, if it just sees the course ID, there it is. So something that starts with courses, editor, and then ID. If it sees something like this, then it renders the course editor. And so notice that here's where I named it course ID. I named the third element in the path, I called it course ID, right? And I call the fourth element in the path, right, I called it module ID. Your path could be whatever you want, right? You can choose it. Actually, in the assignment, I don't believe these are the paths that I ask you for. I ask you for a different set of paths, right? So make sure to follow the instructions in the assignment, right? This is not exactly the path that we ask you to follow in the assignment, right? So follow what's there. So yeah, so I'm calling the third item in the path, I'm calling it course ID. I'm calling the fourth element in the path, I'm calling it module ID, and the fifth, I'm calling it lesson ID. Make sense? And then you can read these elements by name using use params. Okay. All right. Okay. So yeah, we have the module ID, we have the course ID, and we just added this so that we're not gonna load any lessons if we don't have a module selected. Only when you have a module selected, then I'm going to read the lessons, right? So if I go back, right, and then I navigate, I guess I need to clear that. I need to clear that because it does remember, right? It stays remember, right? So I'll let you work on that. So yeah, so I want to be able to click on the fact that I clicked on that module. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to grab the module ID. I'm going to compare it with the ID of the module, because all these modules know their name, their IDs, right? And if my ID, right, matches the ID that is in the path, then I should be selected, right? I should be highlighted. Okay. Again, we're driving all of this. We're driving it from the encoding of the URL, right? We don't have any state variables. We don't have any of that, right? You can have state variables, right? But only for things that you don't really care that you need to reconstruct, right? If you need to, anything that you want to be able to render brand new, and survive a refresh, right? You need to encode it in the URL. Okay. Okay, so yeah, so we have the module ID right here. We're going to compare it. So let's highlight in the module list. Here's the modules, and right now it's rendering the editable. So let's go in there, and let's render not only the title, but let's render also the ID. Right? So the item dot ID. Okay, there it is. See that ID? Each one has its ID. So if this, notice that it's 7488. See that? Okay, and this is 7488. See that? So if they're the same, then that one should be highlighted. If I click on this one, notice that the ID is 9B8F4, and this is 9B8F4. See that? So I should be able to compare these two, and then just make this the highlighted one, right? So that I know this is the one that is highlighted. Okay, select it. So how do we do that? Well, what we're going to do, right, is that we can notice that we can highlight something. We can highlight something by here in the li, right? We have, I believe, if we say active, right there, we can highlight the whole thing, right? Notice that we highlighted all the line items, right? We don't want to highlight all of them. We don't want to highlight all of them. Only the one that is that is equal to this, right? So we want to programmatically change this, right? So how do we do that? Right, so what we're going to do is that instead of this being hard-coded to be active, okay, what we're going to do is that we're going to convert this into an expression so that we can calculate it on the fly. Okay, so to do that, we're going to convert this into an expression. I'm going to put a curly brackets around it, right, and I'm going to convert this into a backticks, right? So that right now it does the same thing, right? It's not doing any difference, right? It's not highlighted. Okay. And so what we're going to do is that we're going to ask ourselves, we want to add the active here, the active keyword. We're going to add the active class, but not always, right? Sometimes, only if the IDs match, right? So we can do that. We can say this is an expression, right? This is an expression. It could be a constant. We can ask ourselves, is the current module that I am iterating over? Notice I'm iterating over the modules, right? Is the current ID, right? Is it equal to the module ID? Oh, we don't have the module ID. Let's grab the module ID here. Okay? Module ID from the parameters, right? If it's equal from the path, right? If it's equal to the module ID in the path, is it equal? Right? We're doing a tertiary expression, right? Is it equal? If it is, this is going to evaluate to active. If it's not, it's going to evaluate to the empty string, right? So there it is. Notice that it's highlighted. If I click on different ones, notice that it is highlighting the correct one, right? The styling is not quite right. The styling is not quite right. That's easy, right? We can fix that, right? If we can see, if we do inspect, basically the list group item active, right? We want to change this color. There it is. So basically we want to change this style to be brown color. We want it to be white. That didn't work. I think what the color we want to change is maybe the hyperlink. Let's see. Background color is transparent. Okay, so you notice the foreground is making a blue, and that's our problem, right? We want this to be white. Okay. So yeah. So let's fix it. We can say that if you have this class, we can change that here in the globally in the index.css, right? We can say if you have list group item, dot active followed by a hyperlink, right? Followed by a hyperlink, then I want the color to be white. There we are, right? Oops. Oh, I guess we want to not hover. In the hover, oh wait, why is it changing it all white? I don't want all white. List group dot active is white. Why is this white over here? I didn't change it to white. Oh, okay, I did. I guess I changed it in the browser. There we go. All right, so we can highlight this. All right, so let's practice that again. Right, let's do that again in slow motion. Right, let's do it now for the lessons. Yes, first of all, let's clear the ID. We don't really need the ID. So let's go back to the editable, and let's not show the ID. There we go. So I want to be able to click here. I'm going to click and notice that the ID is being encoded up here. See that? That's in the lesson ID. And what we're going to do is that when we iterate over the lessons, we're going to compare the ID of the lesson with the lesson ID. Okay, and they're the same, we're going to highlight it. Okay, so let's go to the lesson tabs, and the iteration is right here. Right? So here's where the line item, we can add active. Now active highlights all of them. Oh, I guess not. Nav item active now. How do you turn on active? Is it maybe here in the hyperlink maybe? No. Wait, why is this not? Am I in the right place? This is lesson tabs. Lesson tabs. Is it not active? No, interesting. Oh yeah, no. So active in tabs. Actives means that you put the you put the border around the tab, right? And I think it was doing it, but my monitor, I can't see it in my monitor. Let me put active here. Let's see. Yeah, see, you can barely see it here, but there's a very thin line all around. I'm going to change this. Instead of being nav item, instead of these being nav, what is it? I think it's, instead of tabs, I'm going to use pills so that you can see it better. Pills. There we go. Right, pills, they're easier to see, right, than tabs. So yeah, no, notice that they're all selected, right? So we don't want to do that, right? We don't want to, oops, we don't want to do that, right? We want to do that programmatically inside here, this active here. Right? We want to programmatically change this active here, right? So how do we do that? So what we're going to do, well, let me see, if we put active here, what's going to happen to, right, yeah, we want to compare, right, we want to compare the selected ID, we want to compare the selected ID, compare it to our current ID, right? So how do we get the selected? So notice it's slightly different, right? It's slightly different than what we did before. And the reason is that the styling, the styling of line items in a list group go in line. Okay, is it flexible on the choice of the tabs and pills? So there's a question on the chat that says, is it flexible on the choice of tabs and pills? You mean on the assignment, whether you can use tabs or you can use pills? I guess, yeah, yeah, I don't mind you using pills instead of tabs. Yeah, and you can quote me on that. Make sure that if you lose points, let me know. Right, I'm gonna make sure that in the rubric it says that you can use, you know, either one. Okay, especially because you know, some folks are using other styling libraries. and you don't have to use Bootstrap, right? You can use other libraries. Anyway, so the editable item each item knows about their own IDs, right? And so what we could do here is just calculate this, and pass it as a variable, right? So this could be selected or active. This could be a variable that we can calculate and pass it along to the editable item, and it could be a calculation like this, right? So active could be a Boolean expression that we're going to pass along, right? That this is going to be true or false, and then inside of editable, we can say here in the styling, we can say in the style, we're going to convert again, right, this into an expression and it backticks. I'm going to say in the expression, we're going to say, are we active? Question mark. If we are, we're going to evaluate this whole expression to return the key, the string active. Or if it's not, if it's false, then we're going to evaluate to empty string. And active is a brand new property that we're passing along from the outside, right? So that we now can click and it doesn't work. Wait, what? Wait, is it changing? It is changing. Let's see, active. Let's make this true. Okay, and this is false. Okay, so that works. So active. Let's see, is this not calculated correctly? Module ID equal to module ID active. Yeah, that's correct. Module.id equal module ID. And it comes here. Interesting. Why active? Why are you not working? Wait, let me refresh. Let me print here JSON.stringify active. Okay, false. Okay, but if I remove this, so it's not passing this. Interesting. So if I pass this as true, it's not being passed. Why are you not being passed? Oh, I'm in module list. I'm supposed to be in tab, lesson tabs. You know what would have been scary if it would have been actually worked. Okay, so active. There we go. Okay, now it works. So this is equal to what? This is equal to whether it's the lesson, selected lesson, right? So this is lesson, if the lesson dot ID, right, is equal to the lesson ID from the path, okay? And lesson ID, we are going to read the lesson ID from the parameters, right? Lesson ID. There we go. Okay, now it works. Okay, that makes sense? Let's see, is there a question in the chat? Since selecting new module lessons changes URL, does it mess up the page back button? If it is okay, it does. Right, because this is a back, right? And notice that this back is like you said, right? It just remembers the back button, right? And so yes, this should work. This should work to go back to either table or grid or whatever it is. So it should not be just doing back in the history. So when it was simple that we weren't changing the URL, then back would work just fine, right? But now because we are encoding all this and we're changing the URL, like Harrison's saying, right? It's now the back, it just goes back in the history, right? And we don't want that, right? Back, this arrow should go back to either the table or the grid And that's why we encoded the, you can encode whether the layout, right? Whether you can add here, right? And that's part of the assignment. Very good. As part of the assignment, you are asked to encode here. I believe I call it layout. Right. So you're passing to the next component, to the course editor component, where you're coming from, right? Whether you were coming from the grid or you were coming from the table, right? So that you can create a callback so that you can come back to either the grid or the table, right? So you're passing it along. And so that the links that are coming from the grid would say /courses/grid, right? But the ones that are coming from the table would encode as /courses/table. And then you can read that parameter, right? Just with using params, use params just like that, right? So that when you come back, you can use that as a return. So there's a sort of chain of custody. Yes. Yep. From the component to component for that history. Wait, from component to component for that history. I'm not sure what it means. Oh, okay, from component to component. Well, it's not component to component. What happens is that this mechanism of remembering a history is already part of the browser. The browser does this already for you, right? What the use params and use history and all those hooks that that router gives you, right? They're just an API so that you can interact with the behavior that the browser already has, right? The browser already behaves, remembering all the URLs that you're typing, right? And we just want a JavaScript mechanism to control that, right? That to go forwards and backwards in the history. So it's not about the components, it's all about the URL, right? The URL is all managed by the browser, and what JavaScript does is that it co-ops, or it takes over the behavior of that URL, right, to make it for its own purposes. Okay. All right. Excellent. Yeah. All right. So I think we've gone as far as we want. We've shown you being able to create, remove, update, delete things from the server where components are related to one another, where you have a one-to-many relationship from one component when you're navigating to another component, as if you're in the same component and you have two components that are related to one another, one-to-many, but in the same screen. So we've shown you how do you do that, and we also show you how you interact with going out to the server and retrieve this data, right? And then put the data that came back from the server to update the state of the reducer, right? So those are the main skills that you need for integrating the a React application with a RESTful service, right? But this RESTful service, up to this point, it has been kind of like a black box, right? I've documented it for you. And so what we'd like to be able to do now is show you how you would create your own RESTful service, okay? So let's create a RESTful service, and we'll use the RESTful service to introduce the next topic, right? Which is RESTful web services, okay? All right, so let's talk about RESTful web services. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start the other project, right? The Java project. We'll go back to the Java project. Let's open Java project. Okay, so it's I believe it's this one over here. And in that Java project, we were somewhat using it only for static purposes, right? Just static HTML, static JavaScript, CSS, whatnot, and jQuery. Okay, so we're going to use it for much more than just that. Right? What we're going to do is that we're going to create a service that allows us to talk to this to the server and provide data for us. Okay, and so the way we do that is that under the Java directory, right, under the main package, right, where the demo application, see that there's a Java class in there, right? And what we'd like to be able to do is just like right now, our React client application is talking to this server, this generic server that I gave you, well, we want to know how we build that generic server, right? How do we build it? So we're going to build it first using Java, and then we're going to use it Node.js, right? We'll see, and we'll contrast the differences and you know, say the pros and cons of using one or the other, right? So let's create a service. So all our services are going to be created under, it has to be, they have to exist at the same level as your demo application. Well, they could exist other places, but it's easier if you just do it under here, okay? So we're going to create here another package. We'll say new package, right? And here we're going to put all the services, okay? And under here, we're going to create a service. We're going to say new, and we're going to so first we're going to create a very trivial service. We're going to call the hello service. Okay, just a hello world service. Okay, and so this function, this class, right? We could have all sorts of behaviors in here, right? We can have a function that can just say hi, right? We can say public string say hi. Okay, and this returns a string of saying hello world. Okay, and so we want to be able to access this data, right, from outside. Okay, right now, it's just a plain Java object. There's nothing peculiar about this this class and this method, right? What we want to be able to do is be able to run this function from outside remotely. Okay, so how do we do that? I want to be able to map that function to a URL, so that if I hit a URL, something happens in the server, right? I can run code and logic on the server, right? So how do we do that? So the way we do that is as follows, right? We annotate this class, right, as a REST controller, okay? REST controller. So controller means that I am going to be mapped or bound to some URL, some HTTP URL, meaning I am going to respond to incoming HTTP requests. And REST means that I am going to follow certain conventions, or that those URLs are going to be follow a particular pattern, right? It's not just going to be any URL. It's going to follow a specific pattern. Okay. And so if I'm listening for incoming HTTP requests, HTTP can handle different types of requests, right? It can handle GET requests, PUT requests, POST requests, delete requests, and there's several others, right? But we're going to focus on those four main types of requests, right? So and here's where the convention comes in, right? We're going to use the GET request, right, for reading data from a server, okay? And we're going to use POST for creating data in a server, right? And those are the same conventions that we've been using so far in the using the generic server, right? So, but how did I build that? Okay, and so we're going to do the same thing here. Right now, presumably we're going to be reading data right now. So let's do just the simplest, right? GET is for reading data, and it's the simplest of HTTP requests. Okay? So how do I map this to a GET request? So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to annotate a GET, right? I'm going to map this function, this method, right, to an HTTP GET, right? And then I can put here as in a parenthesis, I can configure what the URL is going to be, what it's going to look like, right? So I can say that it's going to be mapped to hello, right? And so what I'm creating here is I'm configuring the server to listen for this URL in its HTTP request. If it sees this in the URL, I want it to run this function. Okay, so let's do that. So if I run this, demo application, it'll start up. If you remember, this started a Java server that listened at port 8080. Right, so now it's listening at port 8080. Let's bring up our browser and point it to port 8080. If you remember here, we had put homepage, we have put login, right? We had put profile, blah, 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 a whole bunch of stuff in there, right? And so those URLs are already mapped. See that? Those URLs are already mapped, /editor/editor.html. And they're mapped to these files, right, in the browser. And that's the default behavior, is that it maps those URLs, right, to actual directories and files. But here we have mapped this URL to something that is not a physical file or a directory. Okay, and that's absolutely fine. That's where we want to go. We want to have these servers not only allow us to retrieve static content like HTML and CSS and JavaScript, but also allows us to retrieve dynamic data. Okay, so for instance, I can instead put here hello, and notice that indeed I am getting the string that I am returning, right? I'm returning that string. See that string, and so and that string is being streamed, right, as part of the body response, right? That then it's being rendered on the browser. Make sense? Okay. Let's do a more interesting example. You know, say I want to be able to send data from the client, from the browser. I want to send data to the server for processing, right? So we'll do something simple. We'll do integer, and we're going to say add, the function add, and I have the values, two integers, integer a and another integer b, right? And basically, I just want to add these two, right? I want to return a plus b. Okay. So let's map this. So a reasonable map would be that, you know, I can call it whatever I want, really. You can say, you know, add A and B or whatever. I can call it whatever I want, right? But now I need to pass those parameters. Now there's two ways of passing parameters. One way is to pass parameters as part of the path, right? And we call those path variables, right? So we can say A and we can say B, right? In React, we were using the colon, right, to declare a placeholder and map it to a variable. Right here in Java, and using this language, right, we're using the curly brackets, right? And we put the variables in there, right? So we want to be able to read these values that I'm going to pass you, okay? And we want to parse those values and convert them into integers, right? And then pass you the values of those path in the path into variables A and variable B, so that you can then return to me the addition of A and B. So to do that, right, this is going to be a little verbose. Okay, we're going to annotate both of these A and B, these integer variables A and B, and we're going to tell them where to get their value, right? We're going to say that they're going to grab their value from the path variable whose name is A. Okay, and same thing for B, right? So this one is going to read the path variable A and B. I'm going to pass them as integers A and B, and then I'm going to return the. Let's try this out. I'm going to restart the server. And yes, I want to restart it every time. Don't ask me. Once it's running, let's see if this is still running. Okay, wait a minute, it's still not running. Okay, there we go. Right, so I want to call this A and B. I'm going to copy that. And there's A and B. And I'm going to pass 2 and 3. And notice that it returns 5. Right, so it's exactly what we wanted to do. Right, everybody okay? All right, so let's do something a little more interesting, right? We want to be able to not just return some some integers and strings and whatnot. I want to return something a little more complex, right? Maybe a whole object, right? So let's create a hello object. Right, so let's create here hello object. Right, and that object can contain all sorts of things, right? It can contain integers, right? Some ID maybe. Maybe a string, like the name of the object, right? It can contain maybe a date, right? SQL date and today. Maybe we could initialize a couple of these, right? We can say new date. Okay. What is it? Result constructor and cannot result constructor. Oh, really? In Java, you can't just do a date. Date. Value of, really?
Maybe date is an interface.
That's an interface, really? Integer, blah, 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 blah. Calendar dot get get instance dot get.
And maybe timestamp, or maybe that one.
Maybe I need to cast something.
You could say equals new timestamp. Because date is an interface, but I just looked it up and
I think it
timestamp.
should be java.util.date instead of SQL. Maybe.
Oh, what did I? Oh, SQL. Okay, that's why. Thank you. Okay, that's what I wanted. Thank you. All right, so now I can create these setters and getters for this, right? And so we can generate the setters and getters, generate the setters and getters for these, so for all of them. So this becomes just a plain Java object, right? There's nothing peculiar about this object at all, right? And maybe we can have a constructor for this as well. And so we're going to say add here code generate, also a constructor with all the arguments, and then also another constructor with no arguments. Right? It's good practice to always have a no argument constructor and a default constructor. So one with no arguments. There we go. Okay. So back in the hello service, we can retrieve a hello object. We can say public and return an entire hello object, right? And then we'll say maybe get hello object. Okay. And we can just instantiate one of these guys, right? We can say hello object, hello, new hello object. Okay, maybe we can initialize some of these values, like the set the ID to be 1, 2, 3, and maybe we can set the name, set name equal to my hello object. Right? I think the date is already instantiated, initialized, and then we can return the object hello, right? And we can map this to a GET request. We say GET mapping, right? And we can say my hello object. Again, notice that how arbitrary this URL can be, right? When we come back and we start talking about RESTful APIs, we're going to see that we don't really want to have just generic, these arbitrary URLs, right? We're going to follow a convention, right? And we're going to talk about that convention. Right? It can't be just any URL, right? It needs to follow some structure. And so we'll come back to that a little later. But meanwhile, I just want to show you what we can build, right? So that's some data, and then if we restart this, Now, obviously, at some point, we're going to connect this to a database, right? So we can go fetch and query something in SQL or Mongo, right? And then retrieve data back and forth from a database. So this could be an interface to some long-term storage. That's exactly what I do with the generic server, right? I long store everything that you folks are posting or deleting or updating, right? I store it in a Mongo database. All right, so I have that, and when I come back here, I can just point it to that URL. And indeed, notice that it returns an object that represents that a JSON object, right? A JSON object that represents that Java object, following the same names of the attributes, right, that we gave them in Java with the correct data types, right? This is an integer, that's a string, right? And that's a date representation of my date object, okay? So anyway, yeah, I'm running out of time, but when we come back next time, right, we're gonna use this technology, right? We're going to follow the convention and follow the industry standards, right, for creating, updating, deleting all the CRUD operations. And we're going to use the next assignment as a means for practicing how is it that we create these RESTful services and integrate our React application with now our service, right? So now we're going to be talking to two services. We're going to be talking to our generic server for our courses, for our modules, lessons, topics, but we're going to talk to our server, right? Oh, the one that you build on your own for widgets, right? Now the widgets are going to be all sorts of different types of widgets, right? That represent different generic content that you can add to a topic, right? To build content that faculty would use to add videos and add links to documents, or just free form text and HTML and all sorts of things. They're pretty cool. Okay. All right, folks. That's all I have for you today. Any questions?
Hello, Professor. Actually, I had a question on React, basically. So, if I have some kind of a form and I want to retain the values of that form on page refresh, so is there any way to
Sorry, you want to do what?
If I have a form with the few input values, text fields and other stuff, and on page refresh, I want to retain all those values, but I don't want to store those values on a server, but I just want my values to get retained. So is there any way to do that?
Yeah, and that's exactly what today's topic was, right? You cannot survive a refresh. You can either store them in local storage. There is a local storage that stores it in the file of the browser, like a cookie, and it's a string. You can put anything you want in there, and then you can parse it as JSON. So you can use local storage, or right, what we've done today, right, where you can encode the information of the form in the URL, so that if you refresh, it'll still be there in the URL, or it needs to be sent over to the server. Those are the only three options.
Okay, got it. And one more question. So, actually, implementing a form. So I want to create a functionality wherein if I enter more than like 50 characters, then all the characters after the 50th character, it should appear in a red color. So, how can I change the color of my characters dynamically? Because the only way I have is I can change the color of the whole element, but not the values of a particular character.
Yeah. Asked me this the other day. Oh, is it CodePen? What? Was it JS Fiddle? Somebody asked me this the other day. Settings. Am I logged in? Wait a minute. Yeah, there's an example. right here. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
So
Oh.
basically, instead of using a text area, how are you doing now? Are you doing with text area?
No, in my input text field. So input type equals to text.
Okay, so this here is an editable text, piece of text. You can say content editable true. So this can be edited. You can type,
Okay.
but I'm using div. See this div?
Yeah.
I'm not using input or text area. Okay.
Okay.
So
Okay.
you can make any elements editable by saying content editable equal true.
Okay.
And then you can have a mixture of text, just that has a particular background color. Notice that I have BG color right here. So the whole thing is BG color. But then you can have certain subtext, right? Have its own class, and then it turn it red. And so,
But I want to make it dynamic. So
oh,
if,
of course, yeah, yeah, exactly. So this would be right. You would have you would generate this as a state, right? Obviously, this would be state driven,
Right.
and then so the first 50 characters would be outside, and then after that, all the would be inside. So you would have two state variables, right?
Okay.
One would be the normal text, and the other one would be like a spillover, right? And then you're responsible for identifying that it's more than 50 characters and splitting into two different variables, right? And you would put some of the content outside and some of the content inside the span.
Okay. So and then I need to concatenate basically my both of my state variables.
Yep. Yeah, you're responsible for keeping track of those state variables. I sent you a link for this.
Okay. I'll check out. Okay, thank you so much.
Sure. All right, anyone else?
Hey, Professor. Yeah, I have one question.
What's up?
For the lesson tabs, you used a logic to check if the module ID was undefined.
Yeah.
So one of them's checking if it's undefined and the type of module ID. Can you explain that part again? I kind of forgot it.
Right. So module list, I believe it was it? What was the lesson?
It's under lesson tabs. At least that's where I wrote it. Yeah.
Okay. So any variable can be of different types, right? A variable can be of type string, integer, number, object, and Boolean. I think those are the only four primitive data types in JavaScript, right? Or undefined, meaning that they haven't yet got any data, so it doesn't know what type it is. Because in JavaScript, the type system in JavaScript is dynamic. So then the type of the variable is determined at runtime, right? So if use parameters is not able to parse anything from the URL, right? Then here you're going to get either undefined because it's not set. There's nothing in the path, right, for it to parse, and you would get here the string. It would be the type of module ID would be undefined, or right, if you actually type the value undefined of some value that doesn't match or is bogus, then it'll actually have the string undefined.
I see.
Right.
So that's like what you see in the console log output is a string undefined.
Right. So here I'm making sure that it's neither of those.
Got it.
Right?
Okay.
If it's not the string undefined, and that that there is a value for it. It has a value. It's not.
I see. Okay, that makes sense.
Okay.
Like the object type, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Sure. I'm going to push this. All right. Anything else? All right then, excellent. Thank you guys. Good night.
Thank you.